I saw the footage for this pop up in a different aspect. They were talking about well, they weren't when they showed the footage. It wasn't talking about Thomas Sewell, the admitted neo-Nazi dude. They just said it was associated with the march and sort of hid the fact that these were the National Socialist Network people. Okay, yep, not nice that they were there, not nice that they were doing what they were doing in terms of the attention they've taken away from the rest of the march and the goals. Okay, they have a right to be able to be there, whether or not we really like the fact that they are. They came in knowing that there was going to be a fight, knowing that things were going to get physical. Now, is that pragmatism? Is that understanding that just by showing up, you're going to attract people who want to punch your face in? Yeah. I mean, when you look at the footage, if you watch it all the way through, and these are obviously screen stills taken from it, they've kept to the side of the road. They haven't marched down the road. They've kept to the footpath. They've basically said, look, we're going to go from here down to Parliament, to the Victorian Parliament, to do the speeches and stuff out the front and basically be on our way. So it seems like they're not advocating for violence. They're not pushing for violence. They've basically got their route clearly marked out. They know exactly what they're going to do, but they've then said, look, counter protesters, i.e. Antifa in this case, aren't going to like what we're doing, and chances are they're going to want to stop us. We're not going to let that happen. And so the inevitable happens, and they're confronted on the bridge, at which point these guys just go, yep, we're not stopping. And elbows, knees, fists, skateboards go flying. And the marchers are the ones that attract criticism. And it's like, well, if you want to be fair, they weren't the ones that instigated it. It was the counter protesters who came across and instigated. The people marching certainly showed a willingness not to hold back. They were going to like, no, we're going to get through. The thing that stands out, apart from the fact that the counter protesters were permitted to basically come in and initiate violence or allow violence to be initiated as a result of their actions, was that there was no police presence up until after fists were flying. And that's kind of concerning in a way, because the lack of police presence for what was an organised march and clearly declared route, etc., would imply, well, doesn't imply it. It allows supporters of the march and allows the more extreme voices to basically say that look, here it's clear the government doesn't care about us, the government doesn't care about the people's voice, the government has a very severe ideological slant, that it supports the actions of the counter protesters because police didn't show up until they started getting their skulls kicked in. It feeds a narrative that may or may not be true, but the lack of police protection for their march as opposed to other marches in previous weeks or at that time, it's one of the things where you can be damned by your actions, whether or not those actions have the intent that other people are attributing to it. There may be completely valid reasons for why the police weren't there at the time or why there wasn't inadequate security, but the fact of the matter is they weren't there, and it allows the marchers and the more extreme voices to basically push forward and say quite clearly the government has no desire to support the everyday Aussie, etc., and so it pushes that it pushes that narrative, and people wonder why the discussion tends towards more extreme viewpoints. It's because when this sort of stuff happens and people see that the police weren't there, that the counter-protesters were permitted to start violence, which wouldn't be allowed if they were marching, and it's the more extreme voices that are talking, it's going to attract support, more support for their positions. When everyone's saying, oh, we want a more moderate take on things, we want to actually have a moderate discussion, well, the boat on that may have sailed, sadly, particularly when those other things were allowed to happen. Now, playing into this is the actions of the police and actions of the parade don't just happen in isolation. They're not just looking at things as, oh, just because this happened on Sunday morning, hence everything is like this. No, they're looking at years of activity, looking at history of behaviours. And so you've got the marches would point to the behaviour of Victorian police during COVID lockdowns and COVID riots, etc., with their suppression of peaceful riots and peaceful activity. Well, declared not peaceful. I mean, I think everybody saw the footage of the grandma getting pepper sprayed in the face. That was from Melbourne. That was a COVID protest march in Melbourne, and they were Victorian police pepper spraying an unarmed grandma in the face for having the gall to go outside her house during a COVID lockdown. Now, that sort of stuff, even though, funnily enough, during the COVID lockdowns, yeah, people might have said, oh, there were cookers and all sorts of people who were like anti-COVID vax. Again, people who were reluctant to take the COVID vaccination got slandered with all sorts of terms that may or may not have been accurate. A lot of the protests, particularly in Victoria, were actually union-led because a lot of their members were facing economic hardship as a result because, well, a lot of union workers under the CFMEU and those other unions were wage-based. And when the entire industry shut down, no one was getting paid. And the unions clashed with the government on it. And it was, and I talked about it recently as well, particularly with the CFMU being put under administration and bits and pieces, about that was one of the schisms that formed between the unions and the Labor governments, particularly in Victoria, because they felt that their power that they'd previously held or their ability to influence government direction suddenly evaporated. And they didn't like the loss of that power and didn't accept it. And, well, unions, when things don't go their way, tend to engage in industrial action. Bit hard when the industry's all shut down, so they took to the streets. And so a lot of the protests in Victoria weren't necessarily people who didn't want COVID vax and things like that. Were people like the unions who were like, hang on, you're killing us. If we're not dying from COVID, we're dying from the fact that we have no economic, no income. How do we live? That sort of stuff. So, coming back to Sunday, when these marchers see that there was no police presence until after the violence had started, it's like, well, you've allowed it to happen. You've allowed the narrative to be created that there are violent thugs because you didn't provide protection for what was a well-advertised event. Subsequent, and you see in the later half of the footage, after things get settled down on the bridge, that everything resumes peacefully, and they then have police presence out the front. But there's no subsequent attempts to disrupt the march. Everyone just continues peacefully. Yeah, they might be saying things people find abhorrent, but they continue to peaceful march. And then once they get to the end point there, then they have a bit of a disagreement with the people talking at the time, as well as whether their role in things. Now, they later went on to disrupt, I think they call it the Sovereign Camp. Okay, I wasn't aware that this was a sacred site in Melbourne, but apparently it is. Something akin to the old tent embassy that was out the front of the old Parliament House in Canberra, but in the middle of Kings Park in Melbourne. I'm not 100% sure. Like, I only heard of it for the first time on the weekend after it got kicked over. So, yeah, quite obviously the media was like, oh, no, this bad thing. Okay, I'm not 100% sure. Never heard of it before. So, Camp Sovereignty, sorry. There we go. Now, he's been arrested because he then showed up behind the Premier at a news conference she was giving. And all of a sudden people are all upset, like, how did he find where she was? Well, a lot of senior politician movements advertise, oh, we're going to be here to give an announcement on this or an announcement on that, so that the media can show up. I mean, it's public knowledge of of certain activities. So, yeah. Yeah, this was, well, calling Jacinda Ardern a coward. Well, okay, again, goes back to why was he doing that? Heil Australia. Okay, now he's just stirring things up. And this is the thing. He's making points that people agree with. And unfortunately, because everything else is being suppressed or that person looks familiar for some reason. Because of being suppressed, it draws people into these more extreme positions. And yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, we'll obviously see more and hear more, but obviously people are back and forth, still complaining about what happened and everything else. But it's interesting to see that based on the footage that had come out, how you can see the moderate voicing being not suppressed, being washed away by the actions that took place and were allowed to take place. And I think that's more telling than everything else.